It was a constant battle, raising a child as stubborn as Lena. Although she had the kindest soul, if she didn't want to do something, she wouldn't do it. As simple as that. The first few times she was sent home from school, her mother had been surprised, but it soon became the standard. That was until after the 12th time her mother had enough. She demanded to speak to the new principal, and the startling truth soon came to light. The principal's office is down the hall, on the right, a kind receptionist told fuming Hannah, who was there to demand answers about her daughter being sent home yet again. Lena stood quietly beside her, being pulled at the arm by her mother. It was like a thundercloud hung above the two, and a big storm could erupt any minute. "You can't go in. He's in a meet." A second receptionist tried to tell Hannah, but she was already halfway through the door. The principal looked up in shock, and his eyes grew wide as they met Hannah's. It stayed quiet in the room for a bit, confusing Lena, who had thought there would be an explosion. "Mom?" she irritatedly said, as she pulled her hand loose. She could see her mother returning back to earth as her brows furrowed and the color returned to her cheeks. "You're the new principal?" she asked, unimpressed. "You're the person sending my daughter home, keeping her from learning?" she added, hearing the anger return to her voice. But why is Lena being so stubborn? Who is the new principal? And how does Hannah know the new principal? Lena threw her bag on the ground as she entered her house. She made sure to throw it hard so the thumb would be heard even on the floor above. Soon after, she heard her mother calling her name from the upstairs bedroom. "Lena?" she said again, as she walked down the stairs. She wasn't surprised, but more annoyed to see her daughter home before the end of school. "What did you do this time?" was the first time Hannah asked of her daughter. It wasn't like this hadn't happened before. Lena sighed and rolled her eyes. "Nothing," she said, and she plopped down on the couch. Hannah stood with her hands on her hips in the door opening, staring at her daughter in disbelief. "Don't you care about school at all?" Lena shrugged her shoulders and reached for the TV remote, but her mother snatched it from the table before she could reach it. "I'm done with your attitude, Lena," she snapped, all the build-up frustration coming out at once. She threw the remote on the other end of the couch and grabbed Lena by the wrist. "We're getting to the bottom of this. Now!" She dragged Lena to the car, and they both stepped inside. Lena sat cross-armed with her legs against the door, staring out at the world passing by, while her mother still raged about how she had changed these last few weeks. "You're not yourself anymore, Lena," she eventually sighed as she looked at her daughter. Lena could hear her mother's worry, but refused to say something in return. "Fine. I'll just have to speak to your principal then," Hannah finally said, and it seemed like she saw something twitch in Lena's face. Stopping at a traffic light, Hannah turned to Lena one last time, hoping to get something out of her. "Did something happen between you and Miss Cardigan?" she asked worriedly. "Miss Cardigan is gone," Lena simply answered. "Gone?" Hannah asked, but someone began to honk behind her. The rest of the car ride was quiet, but full of tense energy. Every little movement Lena made was noticed by her mother, and she felt like one wrong move could set her mother off. As they arrived at Lena's school, her mother pulled her out of the car and grabbed her wrist tightly. "Ouch! You're hurting me," Lena said, as she tried to break loose from her mother's grip, but Hannah only tightened her hand. She pulled her daughter into the school behind her, and Lena had to do her best to keep up with her mother's big steps. "The principal's office?" Hannah asked the receptionist, hiding her anger as best as she could. After the receptionist told Hannah where to go, she stormed off to the principal's office and burst through the door, interrupting an online meeting. The principal, sitting at a large wooden desk, looked up with a mixture of surprise and annoyance. But as his eyes met Hannah's, he abruptly ended his online meeting, saying he would be back shortly. She froze upon seeing the principal, her shock evident, while Lena freed herself from her mother's grip. Hannah's face went pale, her eyes wide. The principal stood up slowly, recognizing Hannah. "Hannah?" he said softly, as if trying to confirm his own eyes. Lena rubbed her wrist and stepped back, watching her mother's reaction with growing curiosity. The room seemed to hold its breath. The principal's face showed recognition, causing Hannah to fall silent and appear disturbed. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The principal walked around the desk, moving closer. "It's been a long time," he said, his voice almost gentle. Hannah nodded slowly, her mind racing. Lena watched the exchange, puzzled by the sudden change in her mother's demeanor. Lena watched, confused, as her mother seemed to struggle with how she knew the principal. "Mom, what's going on?" Lena asked, but Hannah didn't seem to hear her. She was lost in her thoughts, memories flooding back. The principal glanced at Lena, then back at Hannah. "We need to talk," he said firmly, but with a hint of compassion. Lena felt a knot form in her stomach. The tension in the room grew, leaving Lena feeling uneasy about her mother's reaction. Hannah finally seemed to snap out of it, shaking her head. "No, not here," she said, her voice trembling. The principal nodded in understanding. "Let's step outside," he suggested. Lena frowned, watching them both carefully. She didn't like this at all. Something about the way they interacted made her feel nervous. The second receptionist hurried in, apologizing to the principal for Hannah's intrusion. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Davis. I tried to stop her," she said, flustered. She glanced nervously between Hannah and the principal. Mr. Davis held up his hand to calm her. "It's all right, Rachel," he said calmly. "We'll handle this." The receptionist hesitated, unsure whether to stay or leave, but Mr. Davis gave her a reassuring nod. The principal dismissed the receptionist, asking her to give them a moment alone. "Thank you, Rachel. You can go now," he said firmly. Rachel nodded and quickly exited, casting one last worried glance over her shoulder. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving an uncomfortable silence in the room. Hannah watched her leave, feeling the tension rise as the principal turned his attention back to her. The receptionist left, and the principal turned to Hannah with a smug smile. He crossed his arms, leaning back slightly. "Well, this is quite the reunion," he said, his eyes glinting with amusement. Hannah felt a shiver run down her spine at his expression. Lena stood by, still puzzled by the strange atmosphere, but sensing that something significant was happening between the adults. "Fun to see you in here," the principal said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. He raised an eyebrow, clearly enjoying the moment. Hannah clenched her fists, trying to keep her composure. "I'm not here for a social visit, Mr. Davis," she replied sharply. Lena watched the exchange with growing curiosity, wondering what history lay between her mother and the principal. Hannah adjusted her stance, visibly taken aback by his smug demeanor. She squared her shoulders, refusing to be intimidated. "We need to talk about Lena," she said firmly. The principal's smirk widened. "Of course we do," he replied, his voice mocking. Hannah's eyes narrowed, her patience wearing thin. Lena shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension between them and feeling more confused than ever. Hannah demanded to know why her daughter was constantly sent home. "Why is Lena being sent home all the time?" she asked, her voice trembling with barely controlled anger. Mr. Davis leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. "She's not a bad kid. What's the real reason?" Hannah continued, refusing to back down. Lena watched, feeling a mixture of confusion and anxiety. The principal chuckled, suggesting Lena's behavior was due to poor parenting. Maybe if you spent more time being a parent and less time barging into offices, Lena wouldn't be acting out, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Hannah's eyes widened, and she felt her face flush with a mix of embarrassment and rage. Lena's eyes darted between her mother and the principal, sensing the rising tension. His comment struck a nerve, visibly hurting Hannah and angering her further. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice shaking. "You don't know anything about us." The principal's smile didn't falter. "Touchy subject?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Hannah's hands clenched into fists at her sides, fighting to keep her emotions in check. Lena shifted uncomfortably, feeling the weight of the confrontation. Lena watched as her mother struggled to maintain composure. Hannah took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "This isn't about me," she said slowly, forcing the words out. "It's about Lena's education." The principal leaned back, unbothered. "Is it?" he asked, his tone mocking. Lena could see the strain on her mother's face and felt a pang of sympathy, mixed with confusion about the whole situation. The principal's smirk grew as he realized Hannah's unease. It was like he had some control over her. "It's fascinating how defensive you get," he said, leaning forward. "What are you so afraid of, Hannah?" She flinched at his words, her confidence wavering. Lena noticed the shift in her mother's demeanor and felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The room felt charged with unspoken tension. Lena noticed an unfamiliar, intense look in her mother's eyes. It was a mix of fear and anger she hadn't seen before. "Mom," Lena said quietly, but Hannah didn't respond. Her gaze was locked on Mr. Davis, who seemed to enjoy the discomfort he was causing. Lena shifted uneasily, feeling a cold chill run down her spine. Something was happening that she didn't fully understand. The principal shocked everyone by mentioning Lena's father not being in the picture. "I suppose it's harder to manage without a father around," he said casually. Hannah's face went pale, and Lena's heart skipped a beat. "That's none of your business!" Hannah snapped, her voice shaking. The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. The receptionist, who just walked into the room again, looked equally stunned by the comment. She froze in the doorway, her eyes wide with shock. "Mr. Davis!" she exclaimed, her voice full of disbelief. The principal didn't even glance her way, his focus entirely on Hannah. The receptionist's presence added to the tension, making the air feel even thicker with unspoken words. Hannah instructed the receptionist to take Lena outside, deeming the conversation inappropriate for her. "Rachel, please take Lena outside," she said firmly, not breaking eye contact with Mr. Davis. Rachel nodded quickly, moving towards Lena. "Come on, sweetie," she said gently, guiding her towards the door. Lena hesitated, looking back at her mother, but Hannah's expression left no room for argument. The receptionist led Lena to a chair outside the office and closed the doors. "Just sit here for a moment, okay?" Rachel said, her voice kind but strained. Lena nodded and sat down, feeling a mixture of confusion and worry. The door clicked shut, and Lena stared at it, trying to make sense of what she had just witnessed. The muffled sounds of voices raised in anger began to seep through the door. Lena and the receptionist heard the argument escalate behind the closed doors. Muffled shouting grew louder, the voices of Hannah and Mr. Davis indistinguishable but clearly heated. Rachel glanced nervously at Lena, who sat rigid in her chair, straining to catch any words. "It's okay," Rachel tried to reassure her, but her own voice was shaky. The tension in the hallway mirrored the escalating conflict inside. Suddenly, the argument stopped, and an eerie silence followed. The abrupt end left a void that seemed even more unnerving than the shouting. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as she exchanged a worried glance with Rachel. "Why did they stop?" Lena whispered, her voice barely audible. Rachel shook her head, just as puzzled and concerned. The quiet felt heavy, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Lena grew increasingly anxious, fearing the worst for her mother. She fidgeted in her seat, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. "What if something happened to Mom?" she asked, her voice trembling. Rachel put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I'm sure she's okay," she said, though her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Loud crashes were heard from inside the office, prompting Lena to act. The sudden noise made her jump, her anxiety spiking into panic. "We have to do something," she exclaimed, standing up abruptly. Rachel's eyes widened in alarm, but before she could say anything, another crash echoed through the hallway. Lena's fear for her mother's safety overwhelmed her hesitation. Lena jumped up and ran to the door, yanking it open in a panic. "Lena, wait!" Rachel called after her. But Lena was already at the door. She flung it open, her heart racing, desperate to see what was happening inside. The scene that met her eyes made her gasp. The stack of papers that used to be on the desk lay scattered on the floor, and Hannah had taken its place. Lena yelled, causing the receptionist to look up in shock as she ran away. "Mom, come on!" Lena shouted, her voice echoing down the hallway. Rachel's head snapped up, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. She saw Lena's urgency and the determination on her face. Without thinking, Rachel started to move, her instincts telling her to help. Hannah quickly followed Lena out, tying her hair up in a ponytail as she ran. "Lena, wait for me!" she called, her bare feet pounding against the floor. Lena was too quick, and the two of them disappeared in the hallway. The receptionist peeked into the office. "What happened here?" she muttered to herself, stepping carefully into the room. She asked if she should call the police, but the principal declined with a smile. "No need for that," he said smoothly, straightening his tie. Rachel's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "But, Mr. Davis, the office," she began, but he cut her off with a wave of his hand. "It's under control, Rachel. No need to involve the authorities," he assured her, his tone eerily calm. The principal buttoned up his shirt, indicating a physical struggle had occurred. His hands moved quickly, fastening each button with a practiced ease. Rachel watched him, her confusion deepening. "Mr. Davis, are you sure you're all right?" she asked, her voice hesitant. He nodded curtly, finishing with his shirt and straightening his tie. "More than that," he said with a chuckle. After fixing his appearance, the principal hurried after Hannah and Lena. He moved with purpose, his expression set in determination. Rachel followed him with her eyes, still unsure of what had happened, but feeling a growing sense of unease. The hallways echoed with his footsteps as he quickened his pace, determined to catch up to them before they got too far. The principal found Hannah knocking on the girls' bathroom door, asking Lena to let her in. "Lena, please open the door," Hannah called, her voice gentle but firm. The principal slowed his steps, approaching cautiously. He watched as Hannah continued to knock, her concern for her daughter evident. "Lena, it's safe. Just let me in," she pleaded, glancing over her shoulder and spotting Mr. Davis. Hannah smiled as the principal approached, wiping a smear of her lipstick off his neck. She looked calm, almost too calm, as if she had been expecting him. "Mr. Davis," she said smoothly, her hand lingering on his neck for a moment. He met her eyes with a stern look. "This needs to end now," he said quietly. his tone leaving no room for argument. Hannah nodded slightly, her smile never wavering. The principal used a spare key to open the bathroom door. With a quick twist, the lock clicked open. "Lena, we're coming in," he announced softly. Hannah stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the door. As it swung open, they found Lena huddled in the corner, her eyes red from crying. "Come on, sweetheart," Hannah said gently, stepping inside. Lena looked up, her face full of distrust. Together, they coaxed Lena out and led her back to the principal's office. "It's okay, Lena," Hannah whispered, keeping a firm yet gentle hold on her daughter's hand. The principal walked ahead, casting occasional glances back to make sure they were following. Lena dragged her feet, her reluctance clear in every step. The hallway seemed longer than ever as they made their way back. Lena reluctantly followed, still upset and unwilling to look at her mother. She kept her head down, her eyes fixed on the floor. Hannah tried to catch her daughter's eye, but Lena refused to meet her gaze. "We're almost there," Hannah said softly, but Lena remained silent. The tension between them was palpable, each step echoing the distance growing between mother and daughter. The office was cleaned up by the receptionist during their absence. Desks were righted, and papers neatly stacked. Rachel was just finishing up as they entered. She looked up, relief washing over her face. "Everything's back in order," she said, trying to sound cheerful. The principal nodded in approval, while Hannah led Lena to a chair. Lena sat down, her expression still sullen. The receptionist discreetly handed something to the principal, blushing with embarrassment as she had clearly realized what really happened between him and Hannah. "Here you go, Mr. Davis," she said quietly, avoiding eye contact. He took the item with a curt nod, his face giving nothing away. Hannah noticed, but said nothing, her attention focused on Lena, who was fidgeting in her seat. Lena avoided eye contact with her mother, feeling a mix of emotions. She stared at the floor, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and anger. Hannah tried to catch her eye, but Lena's gaze remained stubbornly fixed on the ground. The principal, now standing by his desk, observed the scene quietly, noting the palpable tension between the two. She turned her chair to face the wall, refusing to engage with her mother. The gesture was clear. She didn't want to talk. Hannah sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Lena, please," she said softly. But Lena didn't budge. The principal watched, his expression unreadable. The silence in the room was thick, filled with unspoken words and lingering hurt. The principal observed the strained dynamic between mother and daughter. He leaned back against his desk, arms crossed, eyes flicking between the two. Hannah took a deep breath, sensing his scrutiny. "We need to talk, Lena," she said gently. Lena's only response was a slight shake of her head, her back still turned. The principal remained silent, letting the moment unfold. Hannah began to explain to Lena about her past with the principal, Mr. Davis. She revealed they had been high school sweethearts, rekindling old feelings recently. "Lena, Mr. Davis and we have history," she began, her voice hesitant. "We were close in high school, and when we reconnected, old feelings came back." Lena shifted in her chair, her curiosity piqued despite her anger. Hannah tried to assure Lena it was something she'd understand when older. "I know it's confusing now," she said softly, "but when you're older, it'll make more sense." Lena glanced over her shoulder, eyes filled with a mixture of skepticism and interest. "It's complicated," Hannah continued, "but I promise, it doesn't change how much I love you." Lena turned back to the wall, processing her mother's words. She then turned the conversation to Lena's behavior at school. "Lena, we need to talk about why you keep getting sent home," Hannah said, her tone gentle but firm. Lena's shoulders tensed, and she remained silent. "You're a smart girl, and I know something must be bothering you," Hannah continued, hoping to reach her daughter. The principal watched quietly, waiting to see if Lena would respond. Hannah pressed Lena for the reason behind her stubbornness and misbehavior. "What's going on, Lena? Why are you acting out?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Lena shifted uncomfortably in her chair, but didn't answer. "Please, talk to me," Hannah pleaded. Lena glanced at the principal, then back at her mother, her lips pressed tightly together. The room felt charged with tension. Lena didn't want to speak with the principal present, so Hannah took her outside to the car. "Let's go," Hannah said softly, taking Lena's hand. They walked out of the office, leaving the principal behind. The cool air outside hit them, and Lena seemed to relax a little. They reached the car, and Hannah opened the door for her daughter. "We can talk here," she said, her voice gentle. Lena finally broke down, tears welling up in her eyes as she confessed. "Mom, I didn't know what else to do," she sobbed. Hannah wrapped her arms around Lena, holding her tightly. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just tell me what's wrong," she whispered, stroking Lena's hair. Lena took a shaky breath, her tears soaking into her mother's shoulder. The weight of her emotions began to spill out. She admitted she had a crush on the principal, hoping to see him by getting sent home. "I thought if I got in trouble, I'd get to see him more," Lena said between sobs. Hannah pulled back slightly, looking at her daughter with surprise and sadness. "Oh, Lena," she said softly, brushing a tear from her cheek. "I had no idea." Lena nodded, feeling a mix of relief and embarrassment. Seeing her mother kiss the principal had shattered her crush completely. Lena's face burned with embarrassment and hurt. "I didn't know, Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking. Hannah nodded, understanding the pain her daughter was feeling. "I'm so sorry you had to see that," she said softly. The weight of the revelation hung heavily between them, but it also brought a strange sense of relief. Lena felt a mix of relief and embarrassment as she revealed the truth to her mother. "I was so stupid," she mumbled, wiping her eyes. Hannah shook her head. "No, Lena, you're not stupid. Feelings can be confusing," she said gently. Lena sniffled, feeling a bit lighter now that the secret was out. "Thanks for listening, Mom," she said, managing a small smile. Hannah hugged Lena, comforting her after the emotional confession. "It's going to be okay," she murmured, holding her daughter close. Lena buried her face in her mother's shoulder, feeling safe for the first time in weeks. "We'll get through this together," Hannah promised, her voice steady and reassuring. The bond between them felt stronger, the air clearing with each comforting word. She reassured Lena that her feelings were valid and understandable. "Everyone has crushes, and sometimes they don't make sense," Hannah explained. Lena nodded, taking in her mother's words. "It's okay to feel the way you did, and it's okay to be upset," Hannah continued. Lena felt a wave of relief, knowing her mother didn't judge her for her feelings. "Thanks, Mom," she said quietly. Hannah promised to address the situation with the principal to ensure Lena felt safe at school. "I'll talk to Mr. Davis," she said firmly. "We'll make sure you feel comfortable and safe at school." Lena looked up, her eyes still red but filled with gratitude. "Really?" she asked. Hannah nodded. "Absolutely. You deserve to feel secure at school," she replied. Lena sighed, feeling a bit more hopeful. They discussed ways to improve Lena's school experience and behavior. "How about we find a club or activity you like?" Hannah suggested. Lena nodded, considering the idea. "Maybe art club," she said quietly. Hannah smiled. That sounds perfect. We can talk to your teachers and make sure you're getting the support you need, she added. Lena felt a weight lift off her shoulders, knowing her mom was there to help. Together, they walked back into the school, determined to move forward positively. We'll handle this together, Hannah said, squeezing Lena's hand. Lena took a deep breath, feeling a mix of nerves and hope. As they entered the building, the familiar hallways didn't seem as intimidating. They were ready to face whatever came next, knowing they had each other's support. It was a new beginning for both of them.